We've got a new one sent to us from the Wicked audience. This was Wireless Mike sending us a Thom Hartmann clip. You know I love my man Thom Hartmann. Read his book, The Hidden History of Neoliberalism, and my word, made a whole lot of research a whole lot easier. If you want to know the root cause of a hell of a lot of the problems the USA is currently enduring, and guess what? Europe and much of the rest of the world is currently enduring, and China is not enduring. Read Thom Hartmann's book. You'll understand the cause of so many of our woes. Let's see what he has to say about pornography and the U.S. Supreme Court. It's a wild Friday, folks. It's a foxy Friday, and I'm enjoying the hell out of these Friday Peace Talks. Let's have a look at this clip from Wireless Mike. Also Thom Hartmann.
Pornography, Ginny Thomas and Thomas Jefferson have in common? Well, it's interesting. There's two backstories here. One is in 1803 and the other is in 1968. In 1803, Samuel Chase, who was a complete ass. I mean, nobody really liked Samuel Chase. He was one of those people whose personalities was, shall we say, difficult to deal with. And he was a Supreme Court justice. He was nominated by George Washington. He had, he'd been in the Continental Army. He was a signer of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, or maybe just the Constitution, as I recall. But in fact, they called him Old Bacon Face because he was kind of a ruddy, red-haired guy,
Old Pickle Face? Wait, what was that?
Or maybe just the Constitution, as I recall. But in fact, they called him Old Bacon Face because he was kind of a ruddy, red.
That got me. Old Bacon Face. I'm going to try to bring that back somehow. That's a solid insult. Jesus Christ.
Haired guy, but mostly it was his personality. And he and John Adams was president. And in 1798, John Adams passed the Alien and Sedition Acts, which literally made it a crime to criticize the president, a crime punishable by prison. And then John Adams shut down 20 Democratic Republican newspapers. That was the party that Jefferson found.
Hey, real quick. Hey, gang, real quick. Not every idea our founding fathers had were great. Not every idea was a winner. You should be able to criticize the president. Let me express some American freedom. Joe Biden looks like a popsicle stick with aviators and a dumb wig. That wasn't a very good insult. Let's try another one. He looks like Skeletor's old uncle. Joe Biden is a big damn nerd. You should be able to do that. Not everything the founding fathers wanted to do was great. And also, by the way, they disagreed with each other all the time.
Which is today called the Democratic Party. Back then it was the Democratic Republicans, which is the Democrats, and the Federalists, which are now today Republicans. And Adams was a Federalist. And so he shut down 20 of these Democratic Republican newspapers. He put Benjamin Franklin Bach, Ben Franklin's grandson, in prison. Imprisoned a bunch of other people. I mean, I've told you that story many times here. Sent, Matthew Knox? I'm forgetting his last name, off to jail in, Matthew Lyons. Sent him off to jail in Vergennes, Vermont for criticizing the president. Had Luther Baldwin, the drunk in Trenton, New Jersey. When Adams had this thing where whenever his cart went through town, the local militia had to come out and shoot, a 21-gun salute for him. And Baldwin made a joke about that. That got him thrown in prison. So Chase was a good friend of Adams's and a big advocate of Adams and worked.
Just saying hi to both Amanda Patton and Miles Austin. Delighted to have y'all here tonight. Great to see you, Miles. I'm excited to see what you put in the document, and thank you for muscling through on mobile. You damn kids with your hip hop and your cell phones.
Really hard in the election of 1800, where Adams lost to Thomas Jefferson to get Adams elected. And so Chase, back then Supreme Court justices were also circuit court judges. They quote, rode the circuit 9 months out of the year, and then they were in D.C. 3 months out of the year as Supreme Court justices. And he presided over multiple trials of Democratic Republicans that had criticized the president, that Adams didn't like, and sent several of them to prison, sentenced one to hanging, and Jefferson pardoned him. And so in 1803, the Congress had enough of Samuel Chase, and they impeached him in the House. In the Senate, though, they couldn't hit that threshold for impeachment. And so he stayed on the bench. He was the one and only Supreme Court justice who's ever been impeached and was not successfully removed from office, which sets kind of a bad precedent for the whole idea of being able to impeach Clarence Thomas for his crimes and perfidies and whatnot. Which leads us to door number 2, option number 2. Now, I'm not saying that the Democrats shouldn't not put impeachment on the table. I think articles of impeachment against Thomas being introduced in the House of Representatives would be a great thing. We need to put on the record the things that he has done, the corruption that he has engaged in.
I mean, I adore this man. I adore this man. Yes, sir. Yes, absolutely. Here's how I view all politics. Here's how I view, in fact, basically everything we humans do. But it becomes very relevant in politics. We are auditioning for the history books. We should look at how we will be judged by people who are far removed from this situation because we are building the world for them. I just ragged on the Founding Fathers quite a bit, but one thing I'll give them credit for is they were thinking far, 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 far into the future. Not always with the best of intentions, but they were thinking far into the future. And yes, we should put on the record what this guy did, and we should show that there was plenty of us that weren't all right with it. And we should set the precedent to nitpick and scrutinize and make these people feel like they are being watched because they should be being watched by us who insist that they act within the law.
But this is the 1968 story is even more interesting, and most people alive
and within decency
today were not walking around conscious in 68. And so they don't remember this story. I remember it well because I was 17 years old in 1968. And I remember this was before, this was when, the extent of pornography in the United States was Playboy magazine, right? And, I guess you could get old 8mm films and things, but not when you're 17. So as a teenage boy, Abe.
Clearly he didn't have enough scumbag friends, but fair enough.
Fortas had voted the previous year, in 1967, to legalize pornography, this famous case that involved, I believe it was the movie Deep Throat. I could be wrong. But he had voted that was art, and it was protected by the First Amendment, along with the majority of Supreme Court justices. So Strom Thurmond, who was a white racist segregationist from South Carolina, as I recall, and a Democrat. He became a Republican after 65. But Strom Thurmond started playing in a cloakroom in the Senate the very movies that Fortas had legalized. And all these men, because at that time virtually all the members of the House and Senate were men, they would go in the afternoon, smoke cigars, drink whiskey, and watch porn movies.
Look, we've talked about this before. You got to do the work. I apologize for being 12.
And this was called the Abe Fortas Film Festival. So when word traveled about this, and this was an effort by the Republicans to smear Abe Fortas, to connect him to pornography, then it started spreading around the country. They had an Abe Fortas Film Festival at Michigan State. They had an Abe Fortas Film Festival at Yale University. It made Time magazine. The New York Times wrote it up. And so Richard Nixon decided, he got elected in '68, he decided that he was going to go after Abe Fortas and get him off the court. So how did he do that? Well, right-wing media literally made up a story that Abe Fortas' wife, who was a lawyer and practicing in Washington, D.C., had engaged in unethical behavior, and there was proof of it in a safe in her office. They literally made this up out of thin air. So Congress started hearings, and the Attorney General at the time, I believe it was Richard Thornburg, opened a criminal investigation into Abe Fortas' wife. Now, his wife had done nothing, and this later came out. There was absolutely nothing to these charges. Unlike Ginny Thomas, who, took $500,000, or her organization took $500,000 from Harlan Crow. She was paid $800,000 by the Heritage Foundation. None of this was initially reported by Clarence Thomas. She participated in these $500,000 vacations that they take every year. I don't know if every year is the $500,000 trip to Indonesia, but you get the point. So Ginny Thomas actually is worthy of investigation, both by Congress and by the Justice Department. But what happened with the Supreme Court, Abe Fortas was the most liberal member of the court, just like Clarence Thomas is the most conservative member of the court. And Nixon wanted to get rid of him. And so these investigations, Abe Fortas was then faced with the cost of hiring a criminal defense attorney to defend his wife. He was not a wealthy man. This would have cost him a fortune. And he did not want to see his wife's reputation dragged through the mud. And so he resigned. I mean, this was the deal. He went to Richard Nixon and said, hey, if I resign, will you call off the dogs? And Nixon said, sure, no problem.
It is so much worse than I thought. It's so much worse. Hold up. Yeah, I didn't realize that the charges were totally made up against this person's wife. Should have guessed, given the timing, given the fact that Nixon was in office. But no, my eyes are being opened. Thank you very much for sharing this. Also, discredit where it's due. That takes away from saying that the behavior was ethical. It was for self-preservation, it would seem. I didn't know this, that there was some discussion with Nixon about dropping the investigation into his wife. That said, the behavior for history's sake, what it works out to is the same. This guy was under a cloud of scandal, and what did he do? He stepped down. It looks like he was pressured into stepping down. It looks like some of that scandal was manufactured. But what is it we say? If it can be broken, it must be. You open yourself up to this, that's what you get. Not the false, cloud around his wife, but what Thom Hartmann didn't mention is the earlier scandal with Fortas, with taking money for a teaching position. But still, what I was not aware of was the fact that this was indeed a situation where, once again, Richard Nixon was engaged in corruption in office. Jesus. It makes everybody look worse, and it is worse. But hey, look, if we got a right-winger that's stuck around through all this so far, good on you, and here's the proof. I take away now from that attaboy I gave Democrats, because it was not a matter of Fortas being like, well, I can't carry this on to the Supreme Court. I can't let the court be under a cloud of scandal. No, his wife was in jeopardy. He didn't have the money, because we weren't that corrupt yet, to fight this. Interesting.
And so Abe Fortas resigned from the Supreme Court. So my suggestion, and Richard Nixon replaced him with with Lewis Powell ultimately. I mean, he also put Harry Blackmun on the court. Technically, he replaced him with Harry Blackmun, but there were two openings at that time. He also put Lewis Powell on the court, and Lewis Powell, of course, gave us ultimately Citizens United. It started with Buckley and Bellotti. So my suggestion to Democrats is forget about Clarence Thomas. You're not going to be
Vallejo. And no, don't forget about Clarence Thomas. Let's hear what he has to say, though.
able to impeach him. It'll never pass in the Republican Senate.
Wrong.
But Ginny Thomas?
I take it back. Right, but keep going.
Start an investigation tomorrow. This woman has been up to no good for a long, long time. She sent emails to legislators in Arizona and Wisconsin. We now know this because of the January 6th committee, in which she urged them to overturn the election of 2020, to throw out the votes for Joe Biden and make Donald Trump president. She participated in sedition.
All right, I have even different advice for Democrats, and obviously they're going to listen to me over Thom Hartmann, that nobody. So look, don't let Clarence Thomas go. Don't fail to hold him to account. Don't fail to file the paperwork necessary that Republicans will have to say no to. Make them say no. Make them eat this. Make them own this. That's what I think they should do. But yeah, go after Ginny Thomas too. Yeah, have the Department of Justice go after Clarence and Ginny Thomas. This corruption needs to be dealt with. And if you have a differing opinion, let me know. I would love to hear it. But at the end of the day, I mean, we can't keep pretending like this is fine, this is normal. This is just a rich guy that befriended a Supreme Court justice and bought him a house, or bought his house, and yada, 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 yada. No, this is corruption. We can't pretend like Ginny Thomas wasn't running around engaged in sedition with people who are either in prison or going to prison soon. With people like Mark Meadows who are possibly having to testify. I mean, we can't ignore this. We have to treat it seriously, or the whole world is going to stop treating us seriously, and they'll be right to. Hear from the wicked audience.